So our headline speaker tonight, Dawna Jones.
Thank you. How's the sound? Good? Sweet. Excellent. I'm delighted to be here, delighted to see all these wonderful faces, some of which are familiar from Agile New England, Agile Games, and from programming. So I am a practitioner. It's important to know that because sometimes what I'll share is academic information. It sounds academic, but the reality is that I've watched a lot of dynamics over the years of facilitating in just about every kind of situation, mostly high-end conflict situations. And out of that, you start seeing human threads. So I want to share with you today what I've been seeing in the conversation or the context where Agile meets traditional management thinking. How are we doing over there with the pictures? Oh, and the first slide has my daughter on it. She's a surfer and a professional photographer. I have learned a ton from hanging out with these surfers because so you're going to hear a lot about surfing in this deck today because water is such an excellent teacher for how emotion flows in organizations. And so there's a lot to be drawn from that, and that's exactly what we'll be doing. What I want to do is give you insights, help you look at things a bit differently, see things a bit differently, shift perspective so that when you go back into your home environments, you've got at least 1, 2, maybe 3 or 4 tools that you can use, tools sometimes being just how you see things, but there can also be questions and so forth, different ways of coming at things so that you can, A, make more sense out of them, but B, know how to work with them because it gets messy, very messy in the middle. And that's where we are on all levels. And if we zoom out, and we look at the larger shift that business is going through, either through foresight or through insight. It's the shift from value extraction to value creation. It's the shift from mechanistic, systems, processes, tools, and all the kinds of metrics into understanding organizations are living systems, living conversations, living interactions of humans. That momentum is finally starting to build. As Richard said, 10 years ago we were talking about it, and it is a great relief to many of us who've been working in this field for a lot longer to finally see these conversations being turned this way. Humans First Network is on LinkedIn. There's other conversations globally taking place. Yay, finally. On the value extraction side, all organizations built linearly are under pressure. They're under a huge amount of pressure. We're seeing that in the political arena. We're seeing that in the educational arena as well. And it's simply because linear thinking can't handle complexity at the intensity that it is right now. It's just hugely complex. I tried to get a slide from Massive Change exhibit in 2006 where they mapped on the wall the evolution of complexity over time. And in 2006, the wall was jammed with events that were coming up, inventions and so forth. Imagine what it looks like now. So that's part of it. Both these ways of seeing run on networks. However, bureaucracy tries to control them. And that's on the left-hand side, and that's part of the conflict and tension that we're seeing. But the living systems always run on networks, but they value they're more adaptive. And of course, we just have to look to nature because nature is very good at working with uncertainty and ambiguity. So that's the larger zoom out shift. There is an even larger zoom out shift, but I couldn't fit that into an hour. So we're going to have to park that one for another day. But the next one takes it a level down into your organizations and what's going on there. You have on your table one of these graphs. We'll work with it at the end of the talk. But meanwhile, this is sort of the version. I did this in 2012 to kind of map what I was seeing. And the language that is used on this comes from my colleague, Jay Bragdon, who has running the Living Asset Managed Performance Index since 1995, where he has been for his high net worth clients. So what we have going on here is the conditions of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I'm sure almost everybody, if not everyone in the room, has heard of that condition. The U.S. military began to use it in 1987. So the term's been around a while, but it got popular in about 2010, I'd say. And it's been, increasingly more well-known ever since. So those conditions are putting pressure on companies to let go of finding stability through how they're structured and move more toward agility through trust, through relationships, through the human side of the dynamic. And in the part in between, in that shift between profit as being the purpose of a company and a higher purpose being the purpose of the company, is where the messy middle emerges. So my question in 2001, 2, 3, somewhere in there, I was facilitating a group and I watched them roll back. Literally, incremental change was the best they could come up with. And I thought, what is going on here? And so I did a deep dive into all the sciences and I had a wonderful time. And this is sort of summarizes what I see, because the undertow then comes back to certain things. And what I hope to do now is wrap some sense around it throughout the entire deck, actually. First of all, this is the information that comes from the Latika people. They are dynamic skills people. They measure skills, so they actually have a little instrument that shows your manager is not very good at complexity, but somebody else in the organization is. So in other words, it's a way to sort of see how are we doing with the amount of complexity we're dealing with. On this graph, the blue line represents the complexity in people's jobs, how much complexity they have to manage in their jobs, and the red line indicates how close they are to being able to meet that challenge. There's a gap. Here's what it looks like at the manager level. You've got supervisors pretty darn close, but I would suggest even at the operational level, with some of the innovations that are coming in, that will be challenged as well. And at the senior level, there's a much bigger gap. And this is when decision makers roll back to unconscious bias. Unless they ramp up their set of skills, they will roll back to unconscious bias. And I'm going to talk more about this, but the ones that are most prevalent that you're seeing in some of the decisions you're witnessing roll out, both in your client groups and in your organizations, are expedience and experience. We're under pressure, let's make it fast. Let's get something done quickly. Particularly if the orientation is toward do, take action. If you're not taking action, then you can't be doing anything. And so this is where expedience overrides intelligent decision making, overrides understanding what's going on before you make the grand leap.
Are you describing the pointy-haired boss?
It could be, but not necessarily. It could be, yeah. And then the other thing about traditionally run organizations is their decisions run on beliefs. When I wrote Decision Making for Dummies, I interviewed a guy in California who had called me up and said, I want to talk to you about this because I know you're writing this book. So I stopped off. I was wandering around somewhere, and I stopped off in a cafe. And he said, I can walk out. He said, I've been into about 1,000 organizations, and I can go into one in the first 15 minutes, know what they're going to do next. Why? Because their decisions run on patterns. They run on beliefs. Now, that's brain science, but it's also based on belief, which have a tendency to recycle the past. And again, I'll pull that up a little bit further down. So you've got a combination of stress. Fear of not making the next quarter is high. Fear of survival in some companies is quite high. And what that means is the prefrontal cortex, this part of your brain that makes the executive level decisions about sound judgment, et cetera, it goes offline. Not so helpful. So again, the Letica people, the dynamic skill people, have put this together, and this is where they position Agile. There's a whole, explanation of this, but this is the Agile portion of it. So Agile fits in right at the boundary between advanced linear thinking and then starting to edge into complexity. So as a vehicle for organizational transformation, Agile is a capacity builder for moving from, and I'm hoping you'll hear Agile differently in this, from moving from seeing everything as linear, if we do this, then this will happen, all causal thinking, to understanding that if we push this, then this will happen. It's a completely different scope of thinking. So Agile fits in because it gives you that bridge from the advanced linear thinking into more complexity thinking, and here's the overall picture. So the percentages refer to how many people they surveyed when they put the numbers together, and you can see from this that the more advanced complexity thinkers, there's not a lot of them. So ideally, for us as humans to meet up with the challenges of today globally, we're going to need to ramp up our skills in working with complexity big time. And Agile is a major instrument, a major way of bringing people together in order to do that. So, in a nutshell for this portion of it, Yeah, okay, sorry, don't mind. Agile takes apart a worldview that really relies on predictable certainty. If you observe the behaviors you've got going on in your organization or in yourself, and you say, sort of say, look, I've got to be clear, I've got to be certain about what's going to happen next. This is where you get to breathe deeply and become real comfortable with being uncomfortable. This is the zone, absolutely. It's also the gap, the gap between complexity and the skills people have is where we have cognitive overload. And that is also the place where people start breaking down because it's too much. It's just too much. And this is where we all have to be much more human to each other to get through this. And I'll also explain how that works in terms of the science of it as well. So Agile then, as I mentioned, bridges linear to complex, giving you cognitive agility. You've got more places to go when something shows up that you're not sure what to deal with. And it also, from an organizational goal point of view, at the executive level, there's a capacity to increase responsiveness, which is on the top list of executive goals, but they're not necessarily do they know how and where that's going to come from. That's a communication thing. So, how are we doing with that part? Still breathing? Somebody says, like being behind a fire hose. I said, sorry about that. Okay, so now we'll look at the undertow. We're going to keep unpacking things as we go here. And now we're looking at the undertow. What's going on? What are the signals? You're in the messy middle. This is actually a picture of an undertow. The stuff you can't see from the top. I fortunately coach some Agile coaches. I'm working with group dynamics, so they give me all this wonderful material, and that's where this comes from. So one of the things that creates resistance in organizations, they do a whole lot of that unconsciously, and then they blame the people for being resistant. No, there's a whole lot of things that are going on that they're creating resistance, and one of them is mixing Agile terms with traditional management mindset. So I want to control the situation, I want to control the outcome, but I've got to give them the complete list first so I feel certain, and then have them create to that. You know, it's just the mashup, it deletes trust very quickly. The other one that was raised is leaders call themselves Agile, but they hold back information, they're not transparent, there's not a lot of sharing involved, and so forth. So it's about using that same old language, like allocating resources, moving people around, chasing those old traditional language, but in the Agile disguise. And so that's a great way to delete trust, a great way to create confusion, and a great way to create resistance as well. Does that look familiar by any chance? Okay, good. The other sign is stuck projects. These are my absolute favorite. I forgot about that until I was in Belgium doing a workshop in April, and one of the client groups brought a stuck project out. Yes! Because this is where, when you dig deeper, you find out what fundamental human needs are not being met. And invariably, they've thrown every kind of process at it to try and fix it, and every process imaginable. But what's not being met are people's needs for a sense of belonging, for a shared sense of teamwork, for anything that has to do with humanity. And so they're great fun because everybody learns a lot from taking them apart, but that's what's sitting at the bottom almost all the time, especially when they've already thrown stuff at it. I'm standing on the beach in Los Angeles, and I'm talking to a guy who's got a surfboard. He's heading into the water. And he's the CFO of a company. And I said, hey, what's it like out there? He goes, oh, man, it's a dog-eat-dog world out there, every man for himself. Okay? I'm talking to a pro surfer also in LA, Manhattan Beach. And I said, so what's it like out there? He says, it's a real team. Everybody's a family. We all look out for one another, and that's just how it is. And last year was 2015, Mick Fanning is surfing off the coast of South Africa, and a shark gets caught in his board leash. This is in the semifinals of the World Surfing Championships. And a shark gets caught in the leash of his board, flips him under, and he disappears from sight. The other guy in the semifinal, Julian, swam out to meet him, to see what he could do. That is the spirit that we're talking about for Agile transformation and beyond Agile. It's that spirit. So when we talk about mindset, that's the contrast for you. So these underlying assumptions about who I am and what's my place in the world, the underlying assumptions about who we are with respect to each other start coming out when the zone gets messy because people get scared and or they care more deeply. And that's how it shows up. So looking at the underlying assumptions of organizational dynamics, in the traditional world, where they're under extreme pressure, 90 days to prove themselves. So they're CEOs who've got all these books on maybe spirituality or personal growth or energy psychology, all kinds of cool stuff that they feel is interesting, who at the same time have to meet a 90-day and can't get those two worlds to meet up and make sense together. So they're under pressure, and they're still sticking to the strategy that stability is achieved through certainty. On the Agile side, stability is achieved through agility. Very different. And core strength, I included that slide in there specifically to refer to the core strength that goes with trust and care. In traditional organizations, this used to drive me crazy, it still does. I saw a lot of tensions and collisions used to take people apart. Downward spirals. I got called in on a lot of them. And it was almost always because people they were afraid of conflict. It was almost like there was a fear of fear. So everybody was afraid of conflict. And instead of going to the problem and saying, hey, what's going on here? Let's lay this out. Let's understand. Go dig as deep as we can. They actually allowed the conflict to get worse. And ignored it, made it even easier to let it get worse. So now what we have to do is use those tensions to go in and co-create better solutions, use those tensions to build skills, working with divergence, working with diversity of opinion, of perspective, of everything. And that unpredictable and ambiguity, therefore, then just takes care of itself. I have a good story about that, but I'm going to save it for a bit later because I think it makes more sense. But when you're making decisions in complexity, diversity of perspectives is essential. I have a colleague who's developing a distributed decision-making app. By the time you put all of those views through that app, through a decision, you've mitigated a lot of bias, natural human bias, but you've also come to a decision at the same time. So that's still in beta form, I think. We'll see what happens with that. But the point is that when you hit that tension and collisions, rather than either ignoring it or powering through it, there's an opportunity for everybody to sit down and reflect and just say, hey, what can we do here? What opportunity are we missing if we don't take a closer look at this? So what assumptions get in the way of an optimal working relationship between two stuck parties? If I ask that question and say, what assumptions am I making about you? What assumptions are you making about me? Let's talk about that. That would be fantastic. And the other question that comes up is what's safe to say or do in this organization? If the answer is nothing, you're in big trouble. But if the answer is, well, we can talk about this, but we're not sure about that, well, let's put the not sures up until we build confidence, put it on the table, deal with it directly. Otherwise, it just sabotages and undermines everything you're trying to do. Any of that sound familiar at all?
No text found in that location.
Okay.
Can you repeat that?
I don't know what that was. Yeah. Now I want to unpack a little bit this anomaly of decision making called, gee, it's working. Look, we've done this great job. We've scaled it the entire company. Let's cut it. Why does that happen? Has anybody experienced that, by the way, or observed it, whether it's in the news or a couple of people? I mean, whether it looks like it's been cut or whether it's just ignored. Like that's the other thing that happens in large organizations. Those agile people, they're over there. We're not quite sure what to do with them. They're a bit odd, weird perhaps. And the decision making that goes, with respect to the future of agile then is outside of your control completely. It's in the hands of someone else who has no idea what's going on over there. So let's unpack this one. I mentioned earlier that executive level decision-making capacity, that's the prefrontal cortex, goes offline under pressure, under fear, any kind of fear. If your brain doesn't have enough sugar, it can also go offline. So if you haven't eaten and you're trying to make a big decision, your brain will be compromised. There's proof of that in statements and judgments that judges have made as well. So actually, Richard just wrote a really good article in your newsletter on that. Yeah. So that was fun. So the beliefs would show up like, I don't believe Agile works. Profit comes from, this is the underlying assumption or belief, profit comes from competition, not collaboration. You know, if I'm not competing with you, well, I'm never going to make a profit. If we're collaborating, oh, come on. Can't be serious. So this is the hardcore belief that you're dealing with, and that means you've got to be quite stealthy about how you work with it, and I'm going to get into the stealth zone shortly. Agile principles and values will often challenge beliefs, transparency being a really good one. One of the companies in Belgium I was working with, they told me that they had a person in charge of their architectural division, design division, and they have a super linear, no cross-functional team, so super linear design of their process. And the head got changed over to somebody with Agile principles. So he just sort of said, look, this is how bad it is. This is the situation. Laid it all out. And the other managers are going, whoa, are you crazy? That's a clear, career-limiting move. Are you nuts? Because that's the difference in the view. But what happened when he did that is that all the focus went on, how can we solve this together? So it shifted from saving my reputation, saving my status, into how can we work on this together? So the more you can make those kinds of contradictions clear and put them out there in a clear way, the easier it is for everybody to understand why it feels clunky in that zone, in that messy zone in the middle. The other thing that happens is just short-term focus. There's a lot of that. It seems to be an addiction, and there's some discussion that it may be like cocaine, and once you get hooked on short-term, you can't seem to get off it. So it's one of those things that you have to mindfully balance short-term with long-term, and that's just something everybody's gonna have to work together to flex the muscle on that one. And finally, cognitive bias. I've been at some intriguing events where the questionnaire would say something like, well, how can we eliminate bias by how we ask our questions, just honestly. No, it's unconscious bias for a reason. It's unconscious. And again, read Richard's newsletter for a really good example of unconscious questioning as well. But if David Rock from the Neuro Leadership Institute says if you've got a brain, you're biased. So basically, if someone asks you if you've got any unconscious biases, they're asking you, do you have a brain or not? And that's really the nutshell of it. So this is the reality of it. What you can do in your role is watch and observe carefully where the focus is going. If people are under pressure, they're going to go to expedience because it's familiar, it must be true, therefore I know it, therefore I'm going there. That's how that plays out. The second part of it, experience bias. My perceptions are accurate. That typically happens when processes are not visible. And so you've got an opportunity to make processes visible. And when I get into the stealth mode, there's some suggestions out of the neuroleadership work. Going to do awareness training. Awareness won't help. It's unconscious. Therefore, won't. Making it conscious doesn't really help. But there are ways to design decisions that take the pressure off. So if you Google Neuro Leadership Institute, David Rock, and bias, you'll get a free PDF that lays it all out for you. All of that means that there's a certain level of cognitive load happening, which I may have hit with you. I don't know. Are we doing okay? So this was data from 2008, study done that Americans consume 34 gigabytes on an average day. I haven't been able to get anything more recent. I'm still working on that. But what that means is, from a human point of view, from a data processing point of view, what it means is that your conscious mind takes in about 40 bits, not gigabytes, but just bits. The science is not very clear about what that means, but 40 bits of information. And if you try to Google this, by the way, you will get different numbers. Be prepared for that. I've never seen the same set of numbers twice. So what I would like you to do is look at the ratios here, not the numbers, because they give the picture. So the conscious mind is busy working at 40 bits per second. The subconscious is taking in 20 million bits per second, taking in a huge amount of data, a fraction of which your conscious mind can draw on. So, has anybody experienced overwhelm? Yeah, that's why. And the way you can work with it is literally by switching off your mind and just taking the data in and allowing your intuitive processes and a lot of other subconscious processes to do the work for you. Again, we're still looking for the research on this. This is the closest I've gotten, but it's quoted everywhere, but do you think you can find one? Anyway, we're still working on that. I'll stay tuned. So the most powerful human intelligence we have available to us for working in high-speed, dynamic complexity, very ambiguous times, is ignored or dismissed and certainly not valued in companies, in business, and quite frequently by the humans themselves. In fact, our auto-driving cars are based on the same sensors we have and don't trust. It's hilarious. I've always thought that was really funny. Dave Snowden kindly put this together. I'm pretty sure almost everybody has everybody seen this before? Yeah. So he did a really good job. There's one word common in each of those 4 quadrants. Can anybody spot what it is?
Sense.
Yes! That is the one thing humans can do. Well, actually, all animals can do it, but we have this and we're not using it. Years ago, I was talking to a friend of mine who worked for HP when Dave Packard was there, and somebody had apparently asked Dave, how do you know when your culture is working? And how do you know when the HP way is really working? And Dave apparently said, well, I can't, but I can sense when it's not. So it's that capacity that is probably your most powerful navigational compass available. Mike, am I supposed to look at? Oh, here we go.
It's a big question. Talk about sense. And we also talk about sensing, and we also talk about people reverting to their bias.
Yeah.
Things that they're experiencing or things that they have based on their experience. So, how would you kind of say that, that a particular manager is not actually exercising his sense as opposed to his experience?
The simple way is that if you're using more sensory, you're spending a lot more time not taking action, but reflecting and just listening. Deep, deep listening. Deep listening to what's going on in the environment, deep listening to what the organization is doing. If you're on a bias, your biases are incorporated into your decision on autopilot. There's, that's, and you're not sitting there going, oh gosh, look, he's employing the expedience bias. Bad. No. That's not going to help anybody. But it is understanding. The purpose of me laying it out like that was so that you'd understand that under pressure, people will go to biases unconsciously, and they will go there fast. And that's you, it's me, it's all of us. So the idea is to go, do we have an expedience bias here? Are we in a real big rush? Could we just kind of back this up a bit and just see if there's other ways of accomplishing this? Because generally, when you're working with that kind of an expedience bias, there's one option on the table. That's a sign that it's more fear-driven than it is option-driven. Does that help? Okay, I'll cover a bit more in this as well. Yeah, so Dave very kindly put sense in all 4 quadrants. I'm sure he knew I would use this for that for some down the road. But that's really, that's the gift. In all contexts that we are in, we have the capacity to sense our way through them. And now we just have to do so. So 2 examples I'm going to share. One of them is a doctor. He's actually my daughter's father-in-law. I'm not very good at relationship titles, but yeah, I think that's what he is. Anyway, he's a stand-up boarder and a surfer. He's retiring. And at Christmas last year, he said to me, I'm having a challenging time going into part-time because he said, as a doctor, I go in like that. He said, I'm going in and I'm taking it all in. And he said, but when I go part-time, I have to kind of go, and then he said, it's hard to open up my scanning, so I'm taking in what I need to take in order to make this diagnosis and this treatment correct. And I thought, wow, that's a really incredible bit of awareness. So that's the doctor. The other person I met in 2011 when I was also down in LA, a theme here, I guess, mortgage broker. And he was telling me, I said to him, he's a big surfer. And I said, so how has surfing helped your private life? And he says, well, he said, before the 2008 mortgage crash, I was obviously a mortgage broker, but he said, I could see it coming. And so then he told me this story about him being out on the water one day, and he said, the water just felt sharky. And so he got out of the water and looked down, and yep, there was a great white shark underneath. So I thought, okay, that's probably exactly what that was. And it happened to him again. So it happened to him enough that when he had this sense about the market and the mortgages and how that was being handled, when he had that sense that this was not going well, leading to a happy ending, he's diversified. So he said when it hit, I was fine. He said, yeah, it got a little bit hurt, but he said, no, I was ready for it. So it's that sensory capacity then that when you apply it, it allows you to use, it's like a navigational tool for what's ahead. Foresight would be the word we most often hear. Being able to see down the road, being able to know what was coming. So those are two good examples of what it looks like. And I'm sure everyone in this room will have at some point in stage an example of how you've used your sensory capacity to go here instead of there, drive here instead of there. Or maybe it's a career shift, who knows? Okay, so we're going to shift now into stealth mode and some of the things you can do. But before I do, how are we doing? Okay? Sweet. Good. Nobody's fallen under the table yet? And I haven't bored you to death? No? Okay, so what we're doing then is, in order to navigate that messy middle, what you're doing is applying the principles of complex adaptive systems, which is what all living systems are, your body included, and with the conditions for flow peak performance. I just got back from taking Flow for Writers with Stephen Kotler. Stephen wrote The Rise of Superman, and also is a geek at unpacking peak performance states, neurobiology and neurochemistry. So I just snuck a bit of that in here because when you are working at peak performance states, first of all, you're 5,000 times, the statistics are ridiculous. You're way faster at what you do. You can normally you would spend 5 days at work, you would only spend 2 days at work getting the same amount of work done. So peak performance states are great, but they definitely have a neurochemical downside, which Stephen is really good at explaining. Me, not so much, because I can't pronounce at least one of the chemicals involved that you have in your body. But anyway, do look into that. And also peak performance states minimize cognitive overload. So they take the pressure off the brain because it's distributing what you're working with throughout into a wider place. So the principles of complex adaptive systems that we're working with are run on the quality of human relationships. Now, Agile gets this. If it's in the messy middle, it's often a switch between is it method or is it mindset? Is it method or if we just fix these people with method, will it work? What if we make it more human? Will that work? This is the zone where you weave between what's really needed here. This is the zone where you say, well, if I just pull out one, and there's like 100 processes that I saw listed on the State of Agile report. I thought, oh, lots of processes. If that's not going to help, then how do we use this mindset that we've been developing through agility to work with this situation? So that's the first principle that I brought forward here. The other part of it is behaviors and outcomes are nonlinear and self-organizing. This is the zone called trust. It's the zone where if you push here, great things come out here. But if you pull here, but to just not try to control it, not try to nail it down. That doesn't mean you don't have controls. It just means you're not controlling. You are facilitating, opening, allowing, all those kinds of things. And all of this is going to be dependent on context, history, and initial state, how the whole thing began. Complex adaptive systems thrive on the border between order and chaos. That is precisely where flow states are found. So we're in this wonderful place where when you're in the messy middle, you're in the zone where you get to use that gap to raise the challenge toward your skill set, toward the skill set of those, and up the ante. So instead of rolling back, how can we meet this challenge and go forward? Flow follows focus. So one of the simplest things you can do, and this is the principle in the write-up, that looks super simple, but mastery of it is not. It's called energy flows where attention goes. Observing in your organization, where is the attention going? Where is my attention going in the moment? What am I focused on? That will tell you, that will give you direction into what to do next, where to go next, where to back up and reflect and pause before taking the next step. Pivotal in terms of decision making. Oops. Okay, this is what I call closing the disconnection gap. There's a whole bunch of disconnections, and I really didn't know how to present this, so I hope this works. But when I listen to what people talk about, the thinkers and the doers, the thinkers can be the Accentures, the McKinseys who come in and plan the Agile implementation, and the doers are the Agile coaches who go and make it so, to quote Jean-Luc Picard. What the challenge is to bring those two together and have them be seamless thinking and doing simultaneously. And that's where you're hacking communications. And you're hacking it in fun, novel ways. We'll give you an example shortly. Dave, that's your cue. All right, the second big disconnection is, on the traditional side, is to preserve your status. I'm a lone wolf. I got to do this alone. On the other side is, no, we've got a collective team. We cannot carry complexity on our shoulders all by ourselves. We need support. We need to do it together, distribute the complexity amongst us, if you can put it that way. And so to hack that gap, it's a shared business goal. It might be the shared business goal of responsiveness. It might be the shared business goal of overall change. Who knows? That's something that you will know in your own contexts and be able to identify in your own context and then experiment with it. And the other one is connect by redirecting focus to reduce the stress. A lot of times there'll be focus on deliver, and yet there's no understanding of why the delivery is not happening. So it's diving deep, see what's going on. Why is the focus on delivery, and what should it be on? Because that will open it up, and then you can actually work. So that's what you would have to hack there, because that kind of pressure just puts everyone under a bigger stress, and then everybody starts breaking down, and that's obviously not useful. And finally, the one I chose to highlight was pretend perfection. Everything's cool, we're good, while the house is crumbling down. And commitment, which is, this is personal growth as much as it's anything else. So yes, you can have an armada of methods, but the real change agent is you. And it's how you work with complexity, it's how you work with ambiguity, it's how you work with conflict, it's how you work with tension. It's all of those together. So it is very much you. And I have been given permission by your next speaker in September to tell anyone at the executive level that that's the deal. So that's the situation. You'll hear it from him as well. But the opportunity there is to use transparency for communication. Use those things that are underneath the surface, put them on the surface and say, oh gosh, look, and then work with that directly. It's much easier at that point. It takes the pressure off. Sorry? Right after this. Yeah, so here's the criteria for picking how you're going to hack those patterns in companies. They needs to be novel. It needs to have freedom of choice. There's a sense of control around it. Something's not being shoved in my face. I get to choose whether I read it or not, or look at it or not, or deal with it or not. The risk is shared with the team. It's not carried by the only person. And there's immediate feedback, short cycles. Short cycle feedback really helps people, especially in a mess, because they need to know. And I've got the good example on the tsunami. It really applies here. Multiple loops of feedback is what you're looking for, and equal participation, open communication. These are the yellow 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 of 23 flow triggers that set the context for flow. Some of them are individual and some of them are group. Now, when Dave and I had a chat before coming here about a dynamic that he was in, and we were talking about how you can play with this. You know, it's fun, it's playful, it's not, you don't need to be intense about it. In fact, being intense about it won't help. So it's very playful stuff. Dave, would you mind sharing what happened in one of your organizations? Thank you.
So in the organization was doing an agile transformation. Each department, or many departments, try to put out a monthly newsletter, and they would send it by email to the whole organization. And of course, there was email overload, and almost none of them ever got open, let alone read. One organization wanted to come up with a novel way of doing it, and they printed them out on 11 by 17 paper, one page, and to get engagement with it. Half of it was, here's all the great stuff we've done this month, and here's a trivia contest, and here's a puzzle, and things like that. But to really get some impact and do it in a way that people would read it, they posted them inside the stalls of every bathroom in the entire building. Right. And that worked fine until we moved into a brand new, spanking, beautiful building that the facilities people were very, very proud of. And they put out an edict that the only place that you could post any notice was on approved bulletin boards near the kitchens, and they had to pre-approve the signs. The newsletters in the bathroom stalls went away. But at least when they were there, they had an impact.
Okay, so thank you very much, David. So what did that initiative cover off there?
Novel.
Definitely novel.
Transparency.
Transparency. What else?
Open communication.
Open communicate. Here it is. It's on the bathroom wall. I mean, it doesn't get better than that, right?
Autonomy.
Autonomy.
Produce what they want.
Yeah. Yeah. So knowing that, when you know you've playfully done something like that, and all of a sudden the facilities people come up and say, oh, no, you can't do that. No. Or you go, okay, well, let me do it another way then. Because there are other ways. And you might be acting it out. You might be, I mean, this is a time to lighten things up for people, give people a break. They're under high pressure. So thank you, David, very much for that story, because it's a great way to illustrate what it looks like. Okay. Yeah, this one's a lot harder. This is the overriding the beliefs and biases. And you've heard it. It's fixed mindset. It's very solidly fixed. And you have to obviously change your tactics to account for beliefs and bias. What that means is whenever somebody comes at you with a fixed mindset, what's your default response?
Sorry, repeat.
Sorry, if you're Canadian, you'd say that. So sorry. If you come across somebody who's got a very fixed mindset and they say, look, Agile is not going to work, what do you want to do? What's your first stop?
Argue with them.
Yeah, exactly. And this is one of the hardest things to override in yourself, because if you argue with them and you present them with facts, what happens?
They dig in.
Yeah, they get worse. So it's just like, okay. And so, you're going to do it. And sooner or later, it's going to happen where or you've had an argument with your spouse and you think that facts are going to help that somehow. Whatever it happens to be, you have to back up and rethink your strategy. And this is where it gets creative. So you might bring out a shared goal and say, gosh, look, and this is what they're doing in Belgium with the transparency principle. Gosh, look, this is the mess we're in. We've got all these projects that are behind. How can we all work together to get this to happen? And right away you can hear what you're doing is demonstrating how collaboration is going to get results done, which will override eventually, not all at once, the competition belief. So essentially what you're doing then is bringing people in. That second point, gather information from as many different sources. Leave anybody that's on the wall of thinkers. Find ways to hack into their fortress and bring them, be on their team. Show them, look, I'm just giving you ideas. I know you're going to have better ones yourselves. But here's the overriding business goal. Here's what we did this year. Maybe you pin that up in the bathroom walls, as in Agile, an Agile graffiti advertising campaign or something like that. But just to say, work with it. Cut those boundaries apart. It will take courage and it will take commitment. There's no question about it. At the same time, if you do nothing, you've got pretty much what you've already got. So that's the choice. Hack communication patterns. Dave gave that great example. But I want to also use the other Fukushima plant. How many have heard about that? It's written up in HBR? One person? Just you? Just one person? You haven't read it? Oh, okay, so I mistook this, sorry. Anyway, the story on this is that you've heard of the one that melted down. Well, there was one that did not melt down, was dealing with exactly the same conditions. The difference was that the manager of the plant called everybody together, and basically what they did was they made all of the unknowns and the unpredictables and the uncertainties transparent. And as they checked them off, like how big is the wave really coming in, because those plants were designed, they had 3 contingency plans. One for tsunami, one for earthquake. What was the third thing that happened to them? Tsunami. Sorry? Yeah, the tsunami, earthquake, there was a third thing.
A combination.
I guess. But anyway, either way, they weren't prepared for all 3 happening at once. Yeah. So they weren't ready for that. So they had to go out and say, like they knew that their plant could handle a wave of this size. But then the reports came in saying the wave is bigger. So he sent somebody up to watch for it. And he said, no, it's like twice or 3 times the size they told us it was going to be. So as these things came up, he kept making them visible. And as they found things to be more certain, and they checked off the things that they were previously swimming around in the ambiguous zone, people got confident. And because they could have just run. All of them just could have gone, I got to go home, and just left. But they didn't. They stayed with it, and that plant did not melt down. And that's why. So it's probably the worst possible case example of how to apply all of these things into one place and use those principles well and effectively. Okay? Thoughts? All right. The more you can shift perspective, this is actually in the science of transformation. I was pretty excited to find out about that, especially since it had been common sense for a long time, but it's always nice when science confirms these things. But shifting perspectives, getting more perspectives in, more diversity equals better decisions because you're looking at the whole picture. You're putting the whole picture together. You're not just making assumptions off one aspect of the picture. So that will create better decisions. Sense the underlying dynamics, then steer. So sense first, then steer. Now, I know that's hard to say when things are going 1,000 miles per hour, but pretty much all of you go to the bathroom at some point in time. That's a good time to stop and do your time out and or get out on walking meetings. The more you can spend time in parks, move out of beta, move into alpha brainwave state, relax a bit, then the real data comes to you. Then the real foresight comes to you. That's very useful. Use that resistance in the chaos. Use that resistance to put it on the surface and deal with things visibly, just like the manager of that Fukushima plant did. Okay, there's bigger reasons for what all this is about. Not just climate change and the huge global risks we have in front of us as a civilization and as a species, but there's also the side of it called vision. And I picked this example because it's live and active. They're meeting in September. This is 6,700 islands in Finland, and Finland and Sweden have been arguing about them for
Several hundred years.
Yeah, there you go. They speak Swedish, but they live in Finland. And what they are doing, this is their vision, is to take the position as the leading agile society in the world. So they are learning how to do that through agile. And I think that's a pretty nice vision to hold. Nobody knows if they're going to make it or not. That's not the point. The point is make the vision big enough that it's a worthy goal to go for. And this has been biologically, we are wired to use adversity to dig deeper and pull out that deep, vital, adaptive spirit that we have. This is the true test of human intelligence today. And this is the place where we get to play it. So that messy middle zone that you find yourselves in is training ground. It's a great place to put this into practice and play. And he also says, by the way, that failure to access that deep, creative, adaptive space shows up as violence and aggression. So every time I see violence and aggression in this world, I know that marks a failure to go deep and pull out that adaptive capacity that we each have. Okay.
You need breath.
How are we? Well, thank you. I hope you're all still standing when you go to leave. But okay, So, any observations that you care to share? And I have another microphone for this side. Go ahead. Oh, you can. You don't have anything. You've got the mic. Oh, the keeper of the mic. Anybody want to share something that came up in their discussion? The idea was that you map and then discuss. Some people did that, some people didn't. What happened? Something? Nothing? Dots were passed? Yes.
There's one behind. The mic is there.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, sure. One thing we talked about was that within an organization, there may be a company that could be various stages of this. Some very much on one side are profit-driven, and the other organizations are more shared values and things like that.
Yeah, definitely pockets for sure. Yeah. Will it all stand up under pressure as a whole? We don't know. You know, we don't know. We just don't know what that looks like yet. So, yeah, great observation. Thank you. Any others? Brian?
I'm working embedded as a quality representative in a medical device group within a much larger company. All kinds of processes, very siloed mentality. So the testing group head sits over here and the developers sit over there, and do you think they communicate with each other? He comes to me as the quality guy this afternoon saying, we've got this requirement that the system shall respond gracefully if there's a failure when you delete the bus and such. And he says, how do I show that there's a failure there? I don't know how to create a failure like that when you're asking me. I said, how about we ask the developers what would cause that kind of failure? And in 10 minutes, after he spoke with one of the developers who said, oh yeah, I can take that thing out of the database so that when you go to delete it, the interface should not crash on you. I'm going, sounds like we've got a plan. Why didn't people talk to each other before this?
I mean, you were calm about it, I'm sure, Brian. Right? Yeah, I know. It's so simple. In fact, all of the skills that go with complexity are simple. Listening, questioning. And by the way, the question sheet that's on your tables comes from the conversational intelligence coaching community. Judith Glazier's work, she's just passed, well, she passed away, but her work lives on. And those questions are designed to be brain friendly. There is a small nuance between being brain friendly and hitting that caveman brain that we all have. So when you try to take those questions and reframe them, test drive them a few times with people that you would normally blow up and see if you blow them up that time, because those questions are all of the complexity skills are nuanced. Work here, but just tweak it slightly in terms of how you communicate, or the energy, how you're feeling that day can change everything. So it's very nuanced work. It's much more advanced work than tell, sell, and yell involve. That is why it is challenging, and that is why that's why they call it soft skills, because they're the hardest to learn. And so if we kind of demote them, then we kind of prefer, we don't have to deal with those as they're soft. They're the hardest skills you will probably ever have to learn, but worth it in terms of navigating the messy zone that we're in, not only in organizations, but also globally as well. Anything else? I think I made enough copies of the questions for you for the Judith Glazier work, but yeah, good stuff. Okay, yeah?
I said thank you.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be down here. Yeah, so we've got 10 minutes, right, Richard? Rich? Any other questions or conversations that you'd like to put forward at this point?
So,
Mike's beside you there.
Sam Kainer in his book on facilitation talks about navigating the murky middle.
Yeah, who's that?
Sam Kainer.
Okay. Sam Kainer, K-A-N?
Ken Kaner?
Sam Kainer.
Oh, no.
What's the name of the book?
What?
Spell C-E-M.
Oh.
K-A-N-E-R.
But his first name.
Sam.
C-E-M?
S-A-M.
S-A-M? Yeah.
Okay.
So it's what the facilitator's guide to participatory decision making.
Okay. Right.
And I think he's the guy who came up with that diamond and murky middle and all that stuff.
Okay.
Growth zone. So I'm just curious as to how what you say compares and contrasts with what he has.
I don't know, I'd have to read his material. I haven't read his material. I'm not surprised that somebody else has come up with it, because if you've been professionally facilitating for any length of time, you're working with it all the time. So, yeah, it's not surprising. Somebody was just asking me about decision-making. Was it?
I was asking about Kepner-Trago.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I mean, it's a common zone in terms of that murky middle, so I'm not at all surprised that somebody else has written on that, so thank you for, I'll try and find that reference. And David here was asking about Kepner-Trago, have I heard of it? Yeah, I learned, they were the first process toolkit in my kit back in, okay, don't count, back in the 80s. And yeah, and what I found in using it for years in all contexts, because that's the beauty of running your own business, when you get bored, you go somewhere else. And it's Kepner-Trago. They are linear problem-solving skills, and they have a whole thing on decision-making. A lot of stuff on decision-making, issue analysis, problem-solving, the whole thing. And it's a great foundation. What it helps you do is it helps you separate the linear from the complex all the time in terms of how we think things through. It's a toolkit, but there's more than one toolkit.
And do you want me to say a few words about it?
Yeah, I think it would help the folks, yeah?
Yeah, so, thanks. So they wrote a book called The Rational Manager, and the idea is that most people make decisions sort of based on experience, seat of pants, best judgment, and their observation was that the middle managers and above would be better served by a rational process, an organizational process that they go through to, they have this phase called situation analysis,
Yep.
Decision analysis, opportunity analysis, in order to see what kind of problems you want to avoid in the future, or what kind of opportunities you can take advantage of. And I found the whole thing very useful. I was also impressed that they made the observation that not only do middle managers have these problems, but in fact adolescents do have problems about deciding about what college to go to, or deciding what to do about sex, or deciding what to do about relationships.
Yeah.
And that they formed a nonprofit to teach the same problem solving and decision making skills to middle and high school students, which I think is in fact a very valuable skill for adolescents to have.
Yeah, I completely agree. The other thing about high school kids is that and I mentored quite a few of them, normally the kids that are fringed, but they don't have a prefrontal. I mean, that wiring is still underway in teenage years, so it's offline anyhow. And so what KT stuff does, and a lot of those linear things, is they help you do one thing at a time, not 12 things at once. That's what we always used to say, because you go into a meeting and you're watching people and they're doing 12 things at once. If you break it down step by step, it's so much more efficient. And that's what it's really, really good at.
And I would have said following a systematic process rather than, unconscious bias, or, not knowing how you make a decision, saying, well, I've seen something like this before, we'll do it that way again.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, to say it's not the, when I wrote Decision Making for Dummies, I went to Gary Klein. Gary Klein is naturalistic decision making. He worked with the military on how intuitive decision making. 95% of your decisions are made intuitively. They're on autopilot. The 5% that are conscious are the ones that you're dealing with in the KT conversation. So Gary Klein's written a number of books on this, and I would write pieces up on Decision Making for Dummies, send it to him at stupid hours in the night for him, and he would comment and send them back. So you've got to really keep looking. That's just one toolkit. Keep looking. We're complex humans. And to assume that at the executive level it's rational, sorry, nowhere near. Nowhere near. But thank you. And thank you.